NAA iSeries webinar. I'm Curtis Kitchen, the Director of Publications and Trade Show for the National Auctioneers Association. I would like to thank you for joining us for today's newest iSeries installment. iSeries is a free informational webinar series produced by the NAA in order to share auction industry knowledge and insight with NAA members and the general public. We are excited to present today's topic on hearing from the ATF and selling guns at auction. But before we do, we want to share just a little bit more with you about NAA. Headquartered in Overland Park, Kansas, NAA is the world's largest association dedicated to auction professionals and represents the interest of thousands of auction professionals in the United States and across the world. NAA is dedicated to providing educational programming and resources to help members advance themselves professionally. The NAA's mission is to provide critical resources to auction professionals that will enhance their skills and successes, and its vision is that NAA members are the preferred auction professionals used in the marketplace. Among those resources provided is the iSeries, and today's session will be presented by ATF investigator Justin Byrd. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives Industry Operations Investigator Byrd has been with the ATF since 2012. Justin has a bachelor's degree from Capital University in criminology. Following college, he spent 3 years in the United States Air Force, ultimately reaching the rank of captain in the USAF Inactive Reserve. After leaving active duty, he spent several years working in the oil and gas field as a lease agent and title researcher. During this time, he acquired his master's degree in criminal justice from Florida State University. Since joining ATF, Investigator Byrd has led or participated in 388 federal firearms licensee inspections and 84 federal explosives licensee or permittee inspections. These inspections have included some of the largest firearm dealers and fireworks and explosives distributors in the state of Ohio. Investigator Byrd has also participated in 3 criminal warrants and 2 additional ATF criminal investigations. In addition, Investigator Byrd has conducted 8 training seminars with the Ohio Auction School regarding auctioneers, FFL requirements, and other issues. In his off hours, Investigator Byrd spends time with his wife of 5 years and 2 sons. He enjoys sport shooting, golf, and hiking. He is also an avid fan of the Ohio State Buckeyes, Cleveland Browns, Columbus Blue Jackets, and Cincinnati Reds. And we're awfully pleased to be joined by Justin today. Before the presentation begins, please note that you may take part in the conversation. Type and submit your questions at any time during the presentation. We will get to as many of them as we can during our brief Q&A period. After that, we will also ask you to please take part in a very short 3-question poll as well. With that, Justin, thank you very much for joining us today, and welcome.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me, Curtis. And as he noted, my name is Justin Byrd. I'm an industry operations investigator with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. And today I'll be talking about selling guns at auction. Today's objectives. We'll have a brief review of the Gun Control Act of 1968, a review of when an auctioneer's operations require a federal firearms license, review of some of the required records maintained by FFLs, a review of frequently asked questions, discussion on protecting America, and I'll be taking any questions you may have. Gun Control Act was enacted in 1968, requires anyone who's engaged in business of dealing firearms to obtain a federal firearms license. These FFLs are regulated by ATF, and they're required to maintain records of all the acquisitions and dispositions of firearms. In 1993, the Brady Handgun Violence Act amended the Gun Control Act. It imposed a 5-day waiting period on handgun sales, and then in 1998, the permanent provisions of Brady went into effect. This enacted the National Instant Criminal Background Check System and applied to long guns as well as handguns. Per 27 Code of Federal Regulations 478.11 is defining a dealer as any person engaged in the business of selling firearms at wholesale or retail. Specifically, anybody who actually engages in these businesses as a part-time basis needs to be licensed to do so. Auctioneers and firearms. ATF ruling 96-2 actually was requested by an association of auctioneers of ATF to actually go over when an FFL is actually required. Based on information provided by this association, ATF came up with this ruling and separated auctions into 2 types of auctions, estate type auctions and consignment auctions, and when an FFL would actually be required. As we cover the ruling, just keep in mind that certain terms may not actually hold up with the auction industry per what we interpret as ATF, so keep that in mind as we go forward. Estate type auctions. In these types of instances, someone has passed away, firearms are sold by an executor of the state, they actually belong to the executor, they control the sale of the firearms. This is something they're reaching out to an auctioneer to act as an agent of the executor and of the estate. In these types of situations, an FFL is not required due to the fact that the auctioneer is actually not engaging in the business. They're only acting as an agent for a private sale. Even if you do hold an FFL, regulations required records aren't actually necessary to maintain, and all transactions can occur at the site of an auction. In the second type of auctions, consignment type auctions, auctioneers usually take possession of these firearms prior to sale. These are actually auctions that take place usually on a monthly or 7-monthly basis at the discretion of the auctioneer. And it generally involves accepting firearms from more than one owner. Auctioneers are considered the seller of these firearms in these types of instances because like I said, they're setting up the auctions themselves, and it's more at their discretion. And in these types of situations, an FFL would actually be required. Auctioneers that engage in unlicensed firearm sales, according to the Gun Control Act, basically no one can actually engage in the business of dealing firearms until they have had an application applied for with the licensing center. So if they are engaging in unlicensed firearm sales where they're required to do so, they can incur penalty issues, as dealing without an FFL is actually punishable by federal law, and liability issues where civil actions can actually be taken, and certain situations that, keep in mind, government documents, actual required records can actually protect you from liability. So obtaining a federal firearms license, how do I do that? How do I go about obtaining an FFL if I need one? Well, the people who should apply, obviously, are anyone who's taking part in consignment type auctions that involve firearms, and always apply prior to conducting these types of auctions. The application process, you can contact the ATF Distribution Center to obtain a federal firearms license application, ATF Form 7 packet. The packet will actually include the actual application as well as instructions and the required fingerprint cards. The application is downloadable from our website as a PDF, but you will need the fingerprint cards for that. The distribution center can be contacted via phone, either one of those phone numbers, or via the website. There's actually an order form on our website. Unless you're planning to engage in business of manufacturing or importing, usually the Type 1 dealer firearms is the applicable license that you will need. It's a $200 initial application fee followed by a $90 renewal every 3 years. The application is then submitted to the Federal Firearms Licensing Center, at which point they will receive it and assign it to the appropriate field office, and an investigator such as myself would conduct an in-person qualification interview / inspection prior to issuing the FFL. Eligibility. So, how do I know if I'm eligible? Well, the applicant has to be 21 years of age or older. However, corporate officers, managers, clerks actually don't have to be 21. The applicant, including any responsible persons, cannot be prohibited from shipping, transporting, or receiving firearms or ammunition, interstate or foreign commerce. And the applicant has not willfully violated the Gun Control Act, hasn't previously held a license, hasn't violated any provisions of the Gun Control Act. Applicant has to make sure that they don't willfully not fail to disclose information or lie to an investigator. Has premises to actually conduct business from. You do actually need an actual premises dedicated to this. And certified that any state or local laws are actually are in compliance with, including zoning ordinances, which is probably one of the biggest hurdles we run into. Regulations. So keep in mind the license actually covers the class of business under the address on the license. So it's only actually at the licensed premises that you can conduct your business. A separate license has to be obtained for every location where you're going to be conducting a firearms or ammunition business. The only exception to that is if you're storing firearms or ammunition at a separate warehouse. Transfer of firearms always have to take place at a licensed premises only, so the license is actually only tied to that location. Regulations, further regulations. Records required include acquisition disposition record, also known as the A&D record, bound book record, gun log book, whatever. It is actually a record of all firearms acquired and disposed by an FFL. It can be bound. It can be a bound book, spiraling notebook, something like that, or it can be computerized, and certain headings are required by regulation. The other big record you're going to be keeping is the 4473 firearms transaction record. If you've ever purchased a firearm from an FFL, you know what these look like. It includes documentation of a background check as well as certification from both buyer and seller. This is an example of what an A&D record may look like. Please note that it's a line across there. shows exactly what the firearm is, when it was received, who it was received from, and then who it was sold to. And then this is an example of the most recent 4473 that was revised in 2016. First 3 pages are all filled out per regulations, and then there are 3 additional pages of instructions. Frequently asked questions. What happens during the qualification inspection? So an investigator such as myself would come out. We would go over an overview of all the regulations, examples of required records, contact information is provided. We try to give you as many tools as you need to actually succeed at keeping this FFL. And then the investigator also verifies location and compliance with state and local laws, including zoning. So always make sure you're checking with if you need if there's some sort of firearms permit you need from the state. Always make sure if there's some sort of permit you need from the city for zoning to be able to conduct business from your location. Always verify that prior to applying for the license. How do I conduct business at a consignment auction? So licensed auctioneers must engage in the firearms business from their licensed premises. I can't stress that enough. You can actually display these firearms at an auction site if you have it at a separate location. If you have it at an auction house and your premises is an office or your home, you can actually display them away and agree on the sales, but the actual transfer has to take place at the auctioneer's licensed premises. Keep in mind that if you actually do deal away from your premises, it is a violation of law and can be dealt with accordingly by ATF. The only exception of dealing away from a licensed premises is at a gun show or qualifying event. It has to be sponsored by a national, state, or local organization dedicated to sports shooting. And even in those types of situations, proper record keeping has to be kept. A&D record has to be done. 4473s still need to be conducted. Background checks, etc. Are conducted just as they were at a licensed premises. So what types of guns can I sell at auctions? Well, handguns and long guns are usually the main ones sold at auctions. Keep in mind certain states may have restrictions. If you have any questions about certain state laws, so you can always contact the appropriate state attorney general's office, or if you want, you can always download our publication 5300.5, which goes over state laws, published ordinances in certain local areas, and can conduct how to conduct any kind of gun sales, or if you need permits or anything like that. Restricted guns. Certain firearms are restricted under the National Firearms Act, or NFA. They actually require prior registration and authorization by ATF before they can actually be transferred to somebody. These are commonly called Class 3, include machine guns, short barrel rifles and shotguns, silencers, destructive devices, and what are known as any other weapons. You have to actually have paperwork from ATF to show ownership of these weapons, and then should be accompanying those weapons at all times. Any FFL who deals in these types of firearms actually has to have a special occupational tax stamp applied for and acquired before actually dealing in these weapons. And even though they can be legally owned and registered and sold at auction, keep in mind you always have to make sure the proper forms are actually filed with ATF prior to actually transferring these firearms. If you have any further questions about that, you can always reach out to the NFA branch. They are based out of Martinsburg, West Virginia, and they can answer any question you need about that. Now, if you do actually have a firearm in your inventory that you suspect of being NFA, you always want to contact your local ATF office immediately. Obviously, these are restricted, and if there's actually no paperwork with it or anything, it could be considered to be contraband. What laws must auctioneers follow for selling firearms? Well, no matter what type of auction it is, a state or consignment, you must follow all federal, state, and local firearms laws. Federal law prohibits the sale of firearms to persons under the age of 18, and handguns and other firearms are restricted to persons 21 years of age or older. Again, this goes for any type of auction. If an auctioneer is not an FFL in a state-type sale, transfers are actually limited only to in-state residents because it is a private transfer. Private sales are restricted only to in-state residents. The only exception would be if the out-of-state resident actually holds an active and appropriate FFL to transfer them the firearm. If a non-FFL actually sells a firearm to an out-of-state resident, that firearm has to be shipped to an FFL in that buyer's state of residence to actually conduct the form and the transfer. If you are an FFL, long guns actually can be sold and transferred in accordance with buyer state law. For example, in Ohio, out-of-state residents can buy long guns, rifles and shotguns in the state of Ohio as long as their state has no prohibition against it. So if a Pennsylvania resident wanted to buy a rifle at an Ohio FFL, they could do so and just do the 4473 and do the transfer there and then. Handguns and other firearms such as receivers can be sold, but it cannot be transferred. Obviously, the same thing goes here. Has to be shipped to an FFL in that buyer's state of residence. Compliance inspection. So during the course of your license, an investigator actually may come out to do an inspection of your required records. This includes a full inventory of firearms and a review of any ATF forms 4473. These are usually no notice, will come during your business hours, and we're allowed entry every 12 months without a warrant or permission. It could be a revocable offense if you actually do not allow an IOI to actually enter your premises. So consigned firearms, if I'm going to return them, someone wants it back. When an individual has actually given an FFL to sell their firearm on consignment, they actually have surrendered that firearm unconditionally. So in order to take repossession, they actually have to do a form and a background check to get it back. So a really good practice is letting people know that before you actually take possession of their firearms that they would have to do so. That way you don't run into any roadblocks down the road. Antique firearms. These are any firearms manufactured in or before 1898. Any replica that of those types of firearms that does not fire ammunition that is readily available, as well as any muzzle-loading rifle or any that cannot be used to fire fixed ammunition, so it can't have a barrel that can be put on that fires fixed ammunition. These are what are known as antique firearms. They're actually not subject to the Gun Control Act. They don't meet the definition of firearms per the Gun Control Act, so you can sell these without a license regardless of what type of auction it is. Same goes with ammunition. The sale of ammunition, unless it's armor piercing, is not regulated at all, so you can sell ammunition without a license as well. Obviously, always follow any federal, state, and local laws when selling antique firearms and ammunition. You want to make sure you check with any state laws, local laws, just in case. Straw purchases. Anyone who actually buys a firearm, I mean, I'm not talking about some sort of a gift, but if you're buying a firearm for somebody else on behalf of that person, it's something that's known as a straw purchase. They do account for probably the largest percentage of firearms getting in the hands of people who are prohibited or from owning or possessing them. They are punishable by up to 10 years in jail and a fine up to $250,000. So it's something you want to avoid at all costs, and you want to make sure that these transactions are not occurring at your premises. Protecting America. So to be successful, ATF and FBI needs help from the industry members to keep tabs on things and help us out with this. Please, this is just a few tips on keeping firearms away from those who seek them from criminal activity. Always ask questions about the purchase if you feel uncomfortable. You can always ask about if they're a collector or if they're they're avid hunter or something along those lines. You can always decline a transaction if you feel unsure. If you suspect the straw sale, something's going on, you can always decline any transaction. That is one of the freedoms an FFL provides. And you can always contact your local ATF office to report any activity you are suspicious of. And always educate your fellow auctioneers on if an FFL is required for their business activity. If they refuse to get a license for something that you know is something that requires one, you can always report it to us as well, and we can urge them to get a license and get that process going. Some indicators to look out for when you are conducting auctions, and you see a lot of people, buying a large number of the same or similar model firearms, attempting to conceal conversations. This is key for straw sales a lot of times. Acting evasively, purchasing firearms in a way to circumvent legal restrictions, be it state or federal, to avoid multiple sale reporting, legal conversions of firearms if they ask how they can convert it to full auto or something along those lines. Unusual interest in the deadly force of a firearm or its ability to penetrate body armor. And these are just a few examples of things. So you just want to make sure you're aware of anything that looks suspicious. Some helpful websites if you want to visit us. We are at www.atf.gov. The next link is the one to the Licensing Center, and the one at the bottom is the direct link to download ATF Ruling 96-2, which covers auctioneers and consignment versus estate type auctions. This is the contact information for the Industry Operations Office at the Columbus Field office. We are located in Columbus, Ohio, and that is our straight voice line and our email address to the division. So if you have any questions, you can always direct them there. A couple of questions that were posed to me prior to this presentation. Why was there a distinction between possession or estate guns and consignment auctions, which require an FFL to sell? Keep in mind, it's not necessarily a distinction of possession. It has to do with whether or not you're engaged in the business. As I mentioned before, estate-type auctions are more infrequent. They're not so much at your discretion as they are at the executor of the estate's discretion. So they're the one pretty much running the show on that one. With consignment auctions, that's really an auctioneer's. That's, you know, they're doing that every month or every couple months or something. And there's an organized method to it, and that really meets more the definition of engaged in the business. What is the benefit of a requirement to transfer guns at the licensee's address? Keep in mind, per the regulations, it requires that an FFL is required for any location you're doing transfers. So this also, keep in mind, this also includes major sports retailers or any other major retailers that sell firearms. Walmart has to have a location for every, has to have that license for every location they deal firearms at. So there can be no exceptions to this requirement. That's it's the way the law and the regulations are written. So at this time, if you have any other questions for me, I'm glad to field them.
All right, Justin, thank you so much. At this time, as we mentioned earlier, and Justin just said, we'll now open the floor to questions from our iSeries attendees. If you've not done so already, and we have fielded several questions, so we will get through as many as we can, but if you have not done so, submit your question, and we will do our best to get through as many as we can. So, Justin, our first question is, and this is a little bit lengthy, so bear with me. If the auction is in a building rented by the seller, and we as the auction company never take possession of the firearm, do we need an FFL? And if not, is there a limit to how many people we can sell the guns for?
Okay, so I'm sorry, it's rented. Could you repeat that?
Sure, yeah, it's a little bit lengthy. So basically, the building is rented by the seller, and the auction company never takes possession of the firearm. Do they need an FFL?
In that type of situation, I'm assuming it's because the seller wants them to sell some guns for them, and that's essentially it. In that type of situation, that would fall more under the consignment type of auction, and yes, you would require an FFL for that.
All right, and then the back part of that question is, if not, well, if I guess you said that you need one, but is there a limit to how many people you can sell for in that environment?
No, because the law and the regulations aren't defined by how many you sell. It's just whether or not you're engaged in the business, and then that type of situation that falls under engaged in the business. So, I mean, you're selling firearms on behalf of somebody. Like I said, estate auctions really are the only ones where you don't need a license. Those are types of situations when someone's passed away, there's an executor, there's an estate that needs to be liquidated. It's got very little to do with, you know, just one person selling guns. So that's just an example. So, yeah.
Okay. Next question. Does the restricted gun list apply to estate sales?
Yes, absolutely. So with regard to NFA firearms, yes, those firearms are going to have to be transferred at an estate auction. If it's doing with or without a license, it's got to go to in-state only, and it's got to there's got to be Form 3 or Form 4, depending on who it's going to, an FFL with an SOT or a non-licensee. Those have to be filed. Those have to be transferred. The only exemptions are Form 5s or to lawful heirs. You can use those to transfer NFA weapons to lawful heirs, but that's the only exception to that. So, absolutely, you can sell them in estate auctions, but that paperwork needs to be accompanying those firearms.
Okay, and then we have time for one more question here. You mentioned interpretations at the beginning, and there may be some difference in interpretation between an auctioneer or an auction company and the ATF. Is there a burden of understanding on the auction professional, meaning if they don't understand or if they have their own interpretation, is it on them to get it clarified by their local ATF?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, ignorance is not a defense, so if you feel like you're engaging in something that you may feel is pushing the line that you may need to be licensed, yes, absolutely, you need to contact your local ATF office, because if we get word that you're dealing without a license, we're going to be knocking on your door for a very different reason. So you want to make sure you're always doing what you need to be doing.
Got it. Okay, well, thank you for that, everybody. We appreciate all of the questions, and of course to Justin for the answers to those questions. That will wrap up the Q&A portion of today's event. And we again thank you for everyone who participated in this piece of the iSeries today. It is now time for you to give us feedback on today's session, so please see the poll on your screen and answer the questions as they appear. We will move fairly quickly, so please answer as swiftly as you are able. The first question of 3. I learned something today I will use when selling firearms at auction. I have a feeling I know which way this one's going to go, but again, the question is, I learned something here today that I will use when selling firearms at auction. We'll give you just a few seconds to answer that. Okay, and question number 2, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score and 1 being the lowest, how would you rate today's iSeries presentation? Again, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score and 1 being the lowest, how would you rate today's iSeries presentation? Just a few seconds to finish that. Okay, and the final question in today's survey, off topic, I plan to attend conference and show in Columbus. Yes, maybe, or no, we'd love to have everyone there. We'll have some more information for you here in just a moment. But again, I plan to attend the NAA conference and show in Columbus. Those dates are in July, from July 11th through the 15th. I'll give you just a few seconds to answer that as well. All right, that'll do it for the survey today. Thank you for taking part. Before we end today's session, we do have some updated information on the biggest NAA event of the year, as we just talked about. The NAA International Auctioneers Conference and Show is July 11th through the 15th in Columbus, Ohio. If you haven't registered yet, now is the time. You can do so at conferenceandshow.com. Also at conference, we will have more information from the ATF with Deputy Assistant Director Curtis Gilbert. That session will take place on Thursday, July 13th. So if you weren't planning on going and you wanted to get more information from the ATF, this is your chance to do it. So we encourage you to sign up, attend conference and show in Columbus, July 11th through the 15th, and make sure that you attend that session on Thursday, again with Deputy Assistant Director Curtis Gilbert giving more information on guns, selling them at auction, and of course all of that information coming from the ATF. To learn more about this and other education sessions, visit conferenceandshow.com. As we close today, you will get a replay of today's session through an emailed link by the end of this week. In addition, if you are an NAA member and you've missed any previous iSeries sessions or would like to hear them again, iSeries archives are available at auctioneers.org/NAA-education. Again, that link, auctioneers.org/NAA-education. You do need to be an active member, and you will need to log in to be able to access those. And finally, our next iSeries webinar will be Wednesday, August 2nd at 2 p.m. Central. We will dive into benefit auctions and how to make sure that you are getting paid for your services. Again, that will be on Wednesday, August 2nd at 2 p.m. Central, and we will talk about benefit auctions and how to make sure you are getting paid for your services. We will be sending specific information on that in the near future as well. That's going to do it for today's iSeries. Thank you again for taking part. Thank you again to Justin Byrd for lending his time and expertise in all of his questions, or all of your questions, regarding firearms and selling them at auction. That concludes today's webinar. Remember that the NAA iSeries exists because it's about you. Have a great afternoon.